The phone call came at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew before answering that it would be Brenda Patterson, the HOA president, calling to tell me something I wouldn't like. Yates Irving, her voice drilled through the speaker like a woodpecker attacking aluminum siding, I'm calling to inform you that, as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, your electrical service will be temporarily disconnected. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a moment, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Your electrical service. It's being disconnected. You received 3 notices about the solar panel installation on your roof violating Section 4.7 of the Pinecrest Meadows HOA bylaws. Since you've refused to remove them, we're taking action. My jaw tightened. I'd been fighting with Brenda and her cronies for 6 months about those solar panels. They claimed the panels were an eyesore that decreased property values. I'd countered with engineering reports, cost analyses, and the fact that I'd installed them before the HOA even existed in our little corner of Asheville, North Carolina. Brenda, you can't just cut someone's power. That's not how any of this works. Actually, Yates, I can. I've consulted with our HOA attorney, and since you refuse to comply with community standards, we're authorized to take necessary measures. The board voted unanimously. The board that consists of you, your sister, and your tennis partner? That board? She ignored my sarcasm. The disconnection will last until you agree to remove the panels. Have a pleasant afternoon. The line went dead. Stood in my kitchen, looking out at the dozen other houses visible from my window. Pinecrest Meadows was a newer development, built just 5 years ago on what used to be farmland. My property, however, had been grandfathered in. I'd owned this house for 15 years, long before the developers came in and built their cookie-cutter McMansions around me. When they formed the HOA 2 years ago, they'd pressured me to join, claiming it would be better for everyone. Like an idiot, I'd agreed, thinking it would just mean maintaining the common areas and keeping things pleasant. I hadn't counted on Brenda Patterson. At 4:55 p.m., I watched from my porch as a utility truck pulled up. The driver looked uncomfortable as he walked to my meter. Sorry about this, sir, he called out. I'm just following orders from the property management company. I know it's not your fault, I replied, though every muscle in my body wanted to argue. Do what you need to do. The click of the disconnect was surprisingly quiet for something that would upend my life. Inside, my refrigerator's hum died. The air conditioning wheezed to a stop. By 5:30, as the August heat began settling into the house like an unwelcome guest, I was already sweating through my shirt. But here's what Brenda Patterson didn't know about me. I was a telecommunications engineer who'd worked on disaster recovery systems for 20 years before retiring early last year. When I'd installed those solar panels, I'd also installed a whole house backup generator system with enough fuel capacity to run for 2 weeks straight. It was connected to a 500-gallon propane tank buried in my backyard, regularly maintained and tested. I walked to my garage and pressed the manual override on the generator. It roared to life with a satisfying rumble. Within 30 seconds, my house was humming with electricity again. Lights blazed, the AC kicked back on. My refrigerator resumed its loyal service. I made myself a sandwich and settled in for the evening, figuring this would blow over once Brenda realized I wasn't going to cave to her petty intimidation tactics. That's when my doorbell rang. Tom Hendricks from 2 houses down stood on my porch, looking sweaty and miserable. Yates, hey, weird question, but did your power just go out and come back on? The HOA had it cut. But I've got a generator. His face went through several expressions at once: confusion, anger, then something like desperate hope. Wait, you have a generator running like right now? Yeah, whole house system. Why? Because our power just went out too. And not just ours. I've talked to the Morales family, the Johnsons, the Westbrooks, and everyone on Maple Court. 12 families total. We're all out. A cold understanding settled over me. When exactly did your power cut out? About 5 o'clock, maybe a minute or two after. I pulled out my phone and called the utility company. After navigating the automated system, I finally reached a human being. This is Yates Irving at 447 Oak Street in Pinecrest Meadows. Can you tell me why there's a power outage in my neighborhood? The customer service representative typed for a moment. I'm showing that service was disconnected at that address at the customer's request through a property management company. Right, that's me. But what about the other houses? More typing. Let me see. Oh, that's not good. What's not good? Sir, it appears that when your service was disconnected, it affected the transformer that services your entire street. Your house is at the connection point for that section of the grid. The disconnect should have been done differently to avoid affecting the other properties. So 12 families are without power because of a mistake? I'm seeing the notes here now. The property management company specifically requested the disconnect be done at 5 p.m. today. Our technician followed standard protocol, but yes, it appears the grid layout wasn't properly reviewed. I'm so sorry, sir. We'll get a crew out there first thing in the morning. In the morning? It's going to be 95 degrees tomorrow. I understand the inconvenience, but our emergency crews are currently dealing with storm damage in the eastern part of the county. A non-emergency reconnection will be addressed during business hours." I thanked her and hung up, looking at Tom's increasingly worried face. "So," he asked, "the utility company screwed up. When they disconnected my house, they killed power to everyone on this section. They can't fix it until morning at the earliest." Tom ran his hand through his hair. "Jesus, my wife's mother is staying with us. She's got a CPAP machine, and it's supposed to hit 98 tomorrow. I've got power," I said slowly, an idea forming, "and I've got extension cords." His eyes widened. "Are you serious? Let me make some calls and see what I can do." Over the next hour, I assessed the situation. My generator could produce 20 kilowatts continuously, which was way more than my house needed. I had industrial-grade extension cords from my old job, rated for outdoor use and heavy loads. With some strategic planning, I could run power to the affected houses for essential items: refrigerators, a few lights, medical equipment, maybe a fan or two per house. By 8 o'clock, my front yard looked like a particularly ambitious spider web. Heavy orange and yellow cords ran from outlets on my porch and garage to 12 different houses. I'd worked with the neighbors to prioritize medical equipment first, refrigerators second, then basic lighting and one cooling device per house. It wasn't perfect, but everyone could keep their food from spoiling and stay safe overnight. The Morales family brought over tamales. The Johnsons contributed cold drinks from their rapidly warming cooler. Someone fired up a grill, and suddenly my accidental power company had turned into an impromptu block party. "This is incredible," Yates said, Michelle Johnson, bouncing her 1-year-old on her hip. "I don't know what we would have done. The baby's formula needs to stay cold." "Happy to help," I said, checking the generator's fuel gauge. Still at 80%, we were fine. That's when the headlights swept across my lawn. Brenda Patterson's white Lexus SUV pulled up to the curb, and she emerged like a general surveying a battlefield that wasn't going according to plan. "What is all this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This," I said calmly, "is me helping out the neighbors that your little power play affected." Her face flushed red. "You were the only one who was supposed to." She stopped, realizing what she'd just admitted. "I was the only one who was supposed to have their power cut?" "Yeah, I figured. But the utility company screwed up your petty revenge scheme, and now 12 families are without power because of you. That's not my fault. That's the utility company's incompetence." Tom stepped forward. "Actually, Brenda, it is your fault. You ordered an illegal disconnect to harass a homeowner over solar panels that were installed before this HOA even existed. And now my mother-in-law can't use her medical equipment, so yeah, this is entirely on you." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Those extension cords are a code violation. I could report you." I couldn't help but laugh. "Go ahead. Call the fire marshal. I'm sure he'll be fascinated to hear about how we got into this situation in the first place. While you're at it, maybe explain to him how you convinced the utility company to do an illegal disconnect. It wasn't illegal. I had authorization from the board. The HOA board doesn't have the authority to shut off someone's utilities, Brenda. That's not how property law works. I've already consulted with my attorney." That was a lie. I hadn't talked to an attorney yet, but I planned to first thing in the morning. Brenda looked around at the gathered neighbors, all of whom were watching her with varying degrees of hostility. She'd never been particularly popular. Most people tolerated the HOA because it kept the common areas nice, but now she'd crossed a line that affected real people's lives. "This isn't over," she said, the classic parting shot of someone who knew they'd lost the argument. "Actually, I think it is," called out Sarah Westbrook from her porch. "I'm calling for an emergency HOA meeting. Per the bylaws, any 5 homeowners can request one with 48 hours notice. I'm pretty sure I can get 5 signatures tonight." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You can't, that's not Section 12.3 of the bylaws you're so fond of quoting," Sarah continued. She was a paralegal and had apparently actually read the HOA documents. "Want me to quote it verbatim?" Brenda got back in her Lexus and peeled out, leaving tire marks on the street that would probably violate some bylaw or another. The party continued for a while longer, but people eventually drifted home, leaving me alone with the steady thrum of my generator and a yard full of extension cords. I set an alarm for every 4 hours to check on the system, but I needn't have worried. The generator ran like a champ all night. The utility truck arrived at 7:15 a.m. A different technician, this one with a supervisor, examined the disconnect and shook his head. "This should never have been done this way," the supervisor said. "Who authorized this?" I showed him the paperwork from the property management company that handled HOA enforcement. His frown deepened. "This is going to generate an incident report. Someone could have been seriously hurt. What if there'd been someone on oxygen or dialysis?" "There was someone on a CPAP," I said. "Luckily, I had a backup generator." "Yeah, we saw that spiderweb you've got going. Smart thinking. Look, we'll have everyone back on grid power within the hour, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry. This should never have happened. True to his word, power was restored by 8:30 a.m. I carefully disconnected all the extension cords and coiled them up, waving at neighbors as they tested their appliances and gave me thumbs up. I was winding up the last cord when a silver Mercedes pulled up. A woman in a sharp business suit emerged, carrying a briefcase. Yates Irving? That's me. I'm Patricia Vance, attorney for the Pinecrest Meadows HOA. I need to speak with you about your continued violation of community standards. I gestured to my porch. Want some coffee? She seemed surprised by the offer but accepted. Once we were settled with mugs, she pulled out a thick folder. Mr. Irving, I've been retained to resolve this dispute. The board is prepared to offer you a compromise. If you agree to install screening around the solar panels to make them less visible from the street, they'll drop the enforcement action. And what about yesterday? She shifted uncomfortably. Yesterday was an unfortunate misunderstanding. It was an illegal utility disconnect that affected 12 families and could have resulted in serious harm. The board maintains that they had the authority to— Patricia, I interrupted, using her first name deliberately. I'm going to be straight with you. I don't think you've been given the full story. Let me ask you something. Did the board tell you that my house existed before the HOA? That I was grandfathered in? She hesitated. They said you were an original homeowner, yes. Did they tell you that I installed the solar panels 7 years ago, 5 years before the HOA was even formed? They indicated the panels were installed in violation of current bylaws. Current bylaws that can't be retroactively applied to improvements made before they were written. Did they mention that part? Her expression told me everything I needed to know. Patricia, I think you need to go back and have a more detailed conversation with your clients about the timeline here. And while you're at it, maybe ask them about their authority to order utility disconnects. Because I've done some reading this morning, and I'm pretty sure what happened yesterday violated both state law and the HOA's own governing documents. She closed her folder. I appreciate your candor, Mr. Irving. I'll need to consult with the board. You do that, and Patricia, I'm not the enemy here. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. I coached Little League with half these families before the HOA existed. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to be left alone to maintain my own property the way I see fit. After she left, I did something I'd been putting off. I called an attorney of my own. James Rutherford had helped me with my estate planning and came highly recommended. Yates, good to hear from you. What's going on? I explained the situation. From the solar panels to the power disconnect to the 12 affected families. His whistle was long and low. Okay, that's actually worse than I expected when you said HOA dispute. Let me break this down for you. First, you're absolutely right that they can't retroactively for bylaws on improvements made before the HOA existed. Second, ordering a utility disconnect as an enforcement action is wildly illegal. That's not a remedy available to HOAs under North Carolina law. They can fine you. They can place a lien on your property if fines go unpaid, but they absolutely cannot cut off your utilities. What about the other families who lost power? That's where it gets interesting. Those families potentially have claims against both the utility company and the HOA. The utility company for the negligent disconnect and the HOA for initiating the illegal action that caused it. If anyone suffered damages, spoiled food, medical issues, lost wages from missing work, they could sue. What should I do? Let me send a letter to the HOA and their attorney laying out the legal situation. That usually gets people's attention. In the meantime, document everything. Photos, receipts, communications. And don't take down those solar panels. Wasn't planning on it. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community center. I arrived 15 minutes early to find the parking lot already packed. Apparently word had spread, and people were interested. Inside, the meeting room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where the board normally sat. Brenda was there, along with her sister Carol Patterson Hughes and their friend Diane Morrison. All three looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Sarah Westbrook stood at the front holding a clipboard. Okay, everyone, let's get started. This is an emergency meeting called by petition of the homeowners. I have signatures from 8 families, well over the required 5. According to our bylaws, this meeting is to address concerns about board conduct and authority. Brenda tried to take control. Now, before everyone gets worked up, I want to clarify that yesterday's incident was— You'll have a chance to speak, Sarah interrupted. But first, let's hear from the affected parties. Tom Hendricks? Tom stood up and I could see his hands shaking slightly. My mother-in-law has severe sleep apnea. She needs her CPAP machine to breathe at night. When our power went out yesterday because of the board's action, she couldn't use it. We had to take her to the emergency room at midnight because she was having respiratory distress. The ER bill was $4,000. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Brenda's face went pale. The utility company she started, The utility company disconnected power because you told them to, Tom said, his voice rising. My insurance might not cover this because it happened at home. $4,000 because you wanted to bully Yates over some solar panels that have nothing to do with any of us. Michelle Johnson spoke next, describing the panic of realizing her baby's formula was warming to unsafe temperatures. Roberto Morales talked about missing a day of work because he'd stayed up all night trying to keep his elderly father cool and safe. One by one, the affected families shared their stories. Finally, Sarah turned to me. Yates, do you want to add anything? I stood up slowly. I installed those solar panels 7 years ago on a house I've owned for 15 years. I did it to reduce my electrical costs and my environmental impact. When the HOA was formed, I joined in good faith, believing it would be about maintaining our common areas and keeping the neighborhood pleasant. I never thought it would be used as a weapon to harass someone over a personal property decision that affects exactly no one. I pulled out my phone and brought up some photos. These are pictures of solar panels on other houses in Asheville. Some of them are in neighborhoods with HOAs. Some aren't. They're increasingly common because they make financial and environmental sense. My panels save me about $200 a month in electricity costs. Over 7 years, that's almost $17,000. The board wanted me to remove them because Brenda personally doesn't like how they look. They decrease property values, Brenda interjected. Actually, said Sarah, I looked into that. I pulled comparable sales data for our neighborhood versus similar neighborhoods without solar installations. There's no statistical difference in property values. In fact, homes with solar panels often sell for slightly more because buyers factor in the energy savings. Brenda looked like she'd been slapped. That's not where did you? I'm a paralegal, Brenda. I know how to research. I also researched the HOA's authority to order utility disconnects. Want to know what I found? The room went silent. An HOA in North Carolina can fine homeowners for violations. If fines go unpaid for 30 days, they can place a lien on the property. If the lien remains unpaid for 6 months, they can potentially foreclose, though that requires court approval. What they absolutely, unequivocally cannot do is order utility disconnects, deny access to common areas, or take any action that affects habitability or health and safety. What you did yesterday was illegal. Diane Morrison, who'd been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. I didn't know it was illegal. Brenda told us we had the authority to do it. Carol shot her a look, but Diane continued. She said she'd consulted with an attorney and this was within our enforcement powers. If I'd known it was illegal, I never would have voted for it. Brenda's face was now bright red. We were acting on legal advice. From whom? I asked, because the attorney who showed up at my house yesterday morning seemed pretty shocked when I explained the timeline and the legal issues. I don't have to answer that. Actually, said a new voice from the back of the room, you do. Everyone turned to see Howard Greenfield, who lived on the far side of the development. He was a retired accountant who mostly kept to himself. I've been reviewing the HOA financial records, which as a homeowner I'm entitled to do, Howard continued, walking to the front of the room. I requested them 3 weeks ago and they finally arrived yesterday. According to these records, the HOA has spent $12,000 on legal fees in the past 6 months, almost all of it related to the dispute with Yates over his solar panels. We have $14,000 in our reserve fund. You've spent nearly all of our reserves trying to force one homeowner to remove solar panels that were legally installed before the HOA existed. The room exploded. People were shouting questions, demanding answers. Sarah had to bang a gavel to restore order. How could you spend that much without membership approval? Someone called out. Brenda gathered herself. The board has discretion over expenditures under $5,000. These were multiple separate consultations that you structured to avoid the approval threshold, Howard interrupted. I can see the invoices. They're suspiciously split up. 3,000 here, 4,000 there. It's technically legal, but it's ethically questionable at best. This is ridiculous, Brenda said, standing abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be attacked for trying to maintain community standards. No, you don't, Sarah agreed. You could resign instead. The suggestion hung in the air like a thunderclap. That's not you can't force me to resign. You're right, I can't. But the membership can vote to remove you. According to Section 15.2 of the bylaws, a board member can be removed by a 2/3 vote of the membership at a properly noticed meeting. And this is a properly noticed meeting. Brenda looked around the room, perhaps searching for support. She found none. Even Carol and Diane were avoiding eye contact. Fine, she said finally. Let's have a vote. Before we do that, I interjected. I want to say something. I don't want to see this community torn apart over this. I don't want neighbors fighting with neighbors. Here's what I propose. The board rescinds all enforcement actions related to my solar panels. The HOA bylaws are amended to explicitly allow solar panel installations subject to reasonable aesthetic guidelines that I'm happy to work on. and anyone who suffered damages from yesterday's power outage gets reimbursed from the HOA's general fund. We can't afford that, Brenda protested. You can't afford not to, said a woman I didn't recognize from the back row. My name is Jennifer Martinez. I'm an attorney, and I live in this neighborhood, though I'm not affected by yesterday's outage since I'm on a different grid section. But if this HOA doesn't make this right, those affected families have excellent grounds for a lawsuit. You'd be liable for actual damages, potentially punitive damages, and their legal fees if they win. You're looking at $50,000 or more in liability. How much are the actual damages from yesterday? Tom spoke up. My ER bill was $4,000. If the HOA reimbursed that, I'd call it even. Others chimed in with their losses. Spoiled food, missed work, the cost of buying ice and generators. It added up to about $8,000 total. $8,000 to make this go away versus $50,000 or more in a lawsuit. Jennifer said, seems like an easy choice to me. Brenda sat down heavily. She looked defeated, exhausted. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood nice. I know, I said, and I meant it. But nice neighborhoods aren't about forcing everyone to conform to one person's vision. They're about people being good neighbors to each other, helping out when someone needs it, respecting each other's property and choices. The vote happened 20 minutes later. The membership voted to remove all 3 board members and install an interim board consisting of Sarah, Howard, and Roberto Morales. The new board's first action was to approve my proposal. Everyone who'd suffered damages from the power outage would be reimbursed. The enforcement action against my solar panels was rescinded, and a committee was formed to draft new solar panel guidelines that would allow installations while addressing aesthetic concerns. I left the meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. As I walked to my car, Tom caught up with me. Hey Yates, I never properly thanked you for yesterday. You saved our bacon, you know. My mother-in-law would have been in real trouble without that power for her machine. I'm glad I could help. That's what neighbors do. The thing is, after seeing how well your solar setup works, I'm thinking about getting panels myself. Think you could give me the name of your installer? I grinned. Sure thing. Fair warning though, they're not cheap. But they pay for themselves in about 6 years, and after that it's pure savings. After yesterday, I'm also thinking about a generator. You made that look pretty easy. Well, I spent 20 years working on backup power systems, so I had an advantage. But yeah, if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to help. Over the next few days, life returned to normal. The new board sent out a letter to all homeowners explaining what had happened and outlining the changes being implemented. The reimbursement checks went out within a week, and to my surprise, I started getting calls from neighbors asking about solar panel installations. 3 weeks after the meeting, I was in my yard doing some weeding when a familiar silver Mercedes pulled up. Patricia Vance got out, but this time she was smiling. Mr. Irving, I wanted to stop by and apologize. I stood up, brushing dirt off my knees. For what? I should have done more due diligence before taking the HOA's side. When clients hire me, I generally trust that they're giving me accurate information. But in this case, I should have dug deeper. I let my client manipulate me into pursuing an action that was legally questionable at best. You didn't know the full story. That's not an excuse. I'm an attorney. It's my job to know the full story. Anyway, I've withdrawn as counsel for the HOA. The new board has retained Jennifer Martinez instead, which I think is a much better fit. I appreciate you coming by to say that. She handed me a business card. If you ever need real estate or HOA legal help, please call me. No charge for the first consultation. It's the least I can do. After she left, I went back to my weeding, but I kept thinking about the whole situation. It was amazing how quickly things could spiral out of control when people let their egos and personal preferences override common sense and basic decency. The following Saturday, I hosted a barbecue in my backyard. It wasn't planned as anything formal, just a chance to hang out with the neighbors who'd become genuine friends through all of this. Tom and his family came, along with the Johnsons, the Morales, the Westbrooks, and several others. You know what's funny, Michelle said, watching her daughter toddle around the yard. I was actually opposed to the solar panels at first. Not enough to make a fuss, but I thought they looked kind of ugly. But after seeing how your generator saved us and learning about the cost savings, I totally get it now. We're having a solar company come out next week to give us an estimate. Same here, added Roberto. My dad's on a fixed income, and he's always worried about the electrical bill in summer when he needs the AC. If we could cut that cost, it would give him a lot of peace of mind. I've got the contact info for 3 different installers, I said. Happy to share. And if anyone wants to see my electrical setup, I can walk you through how it all works. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, Sarah found me refilling the cooler with drinks. You handled all of this really well, she said. A lot of people would have been vindictive, would have wanted to see Brenda punished more severely. What would be the point? She's off the board. The problem is solved. I heard she's thinking about selling her house and moving. That's too bad. I mean, we had our differences, but I never wanted her to leave the neighborhood. You're a better person than most, Yates. I don't know about that. I just think life's too short to hold grudges over something like this. The new solar panel guidelines were approved at the next regular HOA meeting. They were reasonable and straightforward. Panels had to be installed by licensed contractors, meet local building codes, and couldn't extend more than 6 inches above the roof line. That was it. No restrictions on visibility from the street, no requirements for screening or camouflage, just basic safety and quality standards. Within 3 months, 6 more houses in Pinecrest Meadows had solar panels installed. Within 6 months, it was up to 10. My house was no longer the odd one out. And property values, they continued to rise, tracking with the broader Asheville market. Brenda did end up moving, selling her house to a young couple with twins. They installed solar panels within a month of closing. I had to laugh at the irony. The incident with the generator became something of a neighborhood legend. The kids started calling my house the power station, which I found amusing. And when Hurricane Zelda hit western North Carolina that September, knocking out power for 4 days, I found myself once again running extension cords to neighbors' houses. But this time I wasn't alone. Tom had installed his own generator system, and Sarah had one too. We formed a little power grid, helping out those who needed it most. The HOA even approved using some of the reserve funds to install a community generator at the neighborhood pool house, which served as a cooling center and charging station during the outage. It was strange how something that had started as a conflict had actually brought the community closer together. We'd gone from a collection of houses with a dysfunctional HOA to an actual neighborhood where people looked out for each other. One evening in October, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Howard stopped by. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." "Want some iced tea?" "Sure." He settled into one of the rocking chairs I kept on the porch. "I wanted to run something by you. The board has been talking about applying for a grant to install EV charging stations in the neighborhood. With all the electric vehicles moving in, it seems like good planning. But I don't know anything about the electrical infrastructure side of things. Think you'd be willing to consult on it? I'd be happy to. Though I should warn you, I'm not an expert on EV charging specifically. You know more than the rest of us. And honestly, after seeing how you handled the whole generator situation, I trust your judgment." We spent the next hour talking about load calculations, electrical service upgrades, and the logistics of installing charging stations. It was the kind of technical problem I'd always enjoyed solving, and it felt good to be using my skills to help the community. As Howard was leaving, he paused. "You know, when I first heard about the HOA going after you over the solar panels, I thought about speaking up. But I didn't want to get involved. I regret that now. If more of us had pushed back earlier, maybe it wouldn't have gotten as far as it did. Water under the bridge, Howard. What matters is that it worked out in the end, true. But it's a good reminder that staying silent when you see something wrong is its own form of wrongdoing." After he left, I thought about that for a while. He was right. The situation had gotten as bad as it did, partly because people had been willing to go along with Brenda's increasingly unreasonable demands rather than challenge her. It was easier to just nod and let her have her way on small things, not realizing that each concession was emboldening her to push further. The holidays came and went. The neighborhood did a coordinated light display that won a local contest and raised money for charity. The new board continued to make sensible decisions, and attendance at HOA meetings actually increased because people felt like they had a real voice. In February, I got an unexpected visit from Brenda. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She'd cut her hair short and looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Yates, hi. I hope this isn't weird, me stopping by." "Not at all. Come in. Coffee? That would be nice, thanks." We settled in my kitchen, and she looked around with apparent interest. "I've never actually been inside your house. It's nice." "Thanks. What brings you by?" She took a breath. "I wanted to apologize. Properly, I mean. Not the half-hearted non-apology I gave at that meeting. I was wrong. About the solar panels, about cutting your power, about all of it. I let my own issues and insecurities turn me into someone I'm not proud of." I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said. "After everything that happened, my husband suggested it. At first I was defensive, but the more I talked to her, the more I realized I'd been using the HOA as a way to feel in control of something. My mother passed away last year, my oldest son moved across the country, and I was feeling lost. So I threw myself into this idea of maintaining standards and keeping things perfect. Because if I could control the neighborhood, maybe I could control this feeling of everything falling apart. I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you. The thing is, I never should have taken it out on you. The solar panels weren't the problem. The problem was me trying to enforce my vision of how things should be on everyone else. And when you didn't comply, it felt like a personal rejection, which is insane because you were just living your life on your own property." I appreciate you saying all that, Brenda. Really, I heard you've been helping people install solar panels, and that you consulted on the EV charging station project. News travels fast. It's a small neighborhood. I just want you to know that I think that's great. You were right all along. The solar panels make sense. They save money and they're good for the environment. I was just too stubborn and too caught up in my own stuff to see it. We talked for a while longer and I found myself actually enjoying her company. Without the armor of HOA authority and the need to enforce arbitrary rules, she was surprisingly pleasant and funny. What are you doing now? I asked. I heard you moved to the other side of Asheville. Yeah, we're in a smaller place with no HOA, thank God. I've been volunteering at a community garden and taking a pottery class. It's been good for me. I needed to step back and figure out who I am outside of being the HOA president who made everyone miserable. She left about an hour later, and I felt oddly moved by the visit. It takes courage to admit you were wrong and to apologize without making excuses. Brenda had done both. Spring arrived, and with it came a new issue. A developer bought the last remaining parcel of undeveloped land adjacent to Pinecrest Meadows and announced plans to build a large apartment complex. Some neighbors were immediately up in arms, worried about traffic, noise, and the change to the neighborhood's character. At the HOA meeting where it was discussed, I could see the beginnings of the same dynamic that had caused problems before. People were talking about fighting the development, hiring lawyers, making noise with the city council. I raised my hand. Can I say something? Sarah, who was now the official board president, nodded. Of course, Yates, I get why people are concerned. Change is uncomfortable. But this land doesn't belong to us. The owner has a right to develop it within the parameters of local zoning. Instead of fighting it, what if we engaged constructively? Talked to the developers about traffic mitigation, maybe negotiated for some improvements to our infrastructure in exchange for supporting the project. There was some grumbling, but people listened. Over the next few months, a committee worked with the developers. The result was a compromise that included traffic calming measures on our streets, an upgraded stormwater system funded by the developer, and a greenway connection that would give everyone in the area better access to the neighborhood park. It wasn't perfect, and some people still grumbled about the apartments. But it was a far better outcome than an expensive legal battle that we probably would have lost anyway. The generator incident, as it became known, remained a turning point in the neighborhood's history. It was the moment when people realized that an HOA could be either a tool for community building or a weapon for petty tyranny, and the difference came down to the people involved and the culture they created. One warm evening in May, almost a year after the power had been cut, I was out walking when I passed a house with solar panels being installed. The homeowner, a woman I'd met a few times but didn't know well, was supervising the work. Looking good, I called out. She waved. Thanks. You started a revolution, you know. I don't know about that. No, really, I was talking to the installer and he said he's done 15 installations in this neighborhood in the past year. Before that, he'd never worked in an HOA community because they usually banned them. Now he's getting calls from other HOAs wanting to update their rules. I continued my walk, thinking about how strange life could be. A year ago, I'd been fighting just to keep the improvements I'd made to my own house. Now I was apparently a solar panel revolutionary. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine. Yes, I still had a landline. Old habits die hard. Mr. Irving, this is Stacy Chen from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on HOA conflicts and solar energy adoption. Your name came up several times in our research. Would you be willing to speak to us for the piece? Please call me back at. I thought about it for a day before calling her back. Part of me wanted to just let the whole thing fade into the past. But another part thought that maybe sharing the story could help other people dealing with similar situations. The interview took place in my backyard, with the solar panels visible in the background. Stacy was professional and asked good questions. What would you say to someone dealing with HOA pushback on solar panels or other green improvements? I thought for a moment. Document everything. Know your rights. Read your HOA bylaws carefully. They're boring but important. And try to find allies in your neighborhood. Most people are reasonable if you take the time to explain things and listen to their concerns. But also, don't back down if you're in the right. Sometimes standing your ground is the only way to force change. And what about the incident where your power was cut? That must have been incredibly frustrating. It was. But it also became an opportunity to help my neighbors and to show that there was a better way forward. Sometimes the worst situations can lead to the best outcomes if you approach them with the right mindset. The piece aired 2 weeks later. It was part of a larger segment on HOA conflicts and included interviews with legal experts and other homeowners. My situation was framed as an example of how conflicts could be resolved constructively rather than descending into years of expensive litigation. After it aired, I got calls from people all over the state asking for advice on their own HOA situations. I wasn't an expert or a lawyer, but I tried to share what I'd learned. The main themes were always the same: know your rights, be reasonable but firm, and try to build coalitions with your neighbors. The most satisfying call came from a man in Charlotte whose HOA was fighting him over the same issue: solar panels installed before the HOA rules were written. I walked him through the arguments I'd made and connected him with James Rutherford, my attorney. 3 months later, he called back to tell me his HOA had backed down and even changed their rules to allow solar installations. "You gave me the roadmap," he said. "I can't thank you enough. Happy I could help. Pass it on if you get the chance." As summer approached and I marked the first anniversary of the power outage, I reflected on how much had changed. The neighborhood was stronger, more connected. The HOA actually functioned as a force for good, rather than an instrument of petty control. And I'd gone from being the neighborhood pariah to something like a respected elder statesman, which was both amusing and slightly alarming given that I was only 53. The real test came in July when Hurricane Andrea threatened the Carolina coast. While Asheville was inland enough to avoid the worst of it, we were expecting heavy rain and wind. Everyone checked their generators and backup systems. The neighborhood emergency plan, which the HOA had developed with my input, went into effect. When the storm hit, we were ready. Power went out for about 30 hours. But nobody panicked. The community generators kicked on. People checked on their neighbors. The system worked exactly as it should. Sitting on my porch during the storm, listening to the wind and rain while my lights stayed on, I thought about that phone call from Brenda all those months ago. In her mind, she'd been teaching me a lesson about compliance and community standards. Instead, she'd accidentally taught the whole neighborhood a much more important lesson about resilience, cooperation, and the difference between rules and values. My generator hummed steadily in the background, a reminder that being prepared and independent didn't mean being isolated. If anything, my self-sufficiency had enabled me to be a better neighbor, to help more people, to contribute more meaningfully to the community. The storm passed. The sun came out. Power was restored. Life went on. And in my backyard, my solar panels gleamed in the afternoon light, silently converting sunshine into electricity, just as they'd been doing for years before any of this started. They'd be there for years to come, a permanent fixture of my home, and a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is also the practical thing to do. The neighborhood had learned that lesson too. Walking around Pinecrest Meadows now, you could see solar panels on nearly half the houses. The revolution Brenda had tried to prevent had happened anyway, not through conflict but through cooperation and common sense. In the end, that was the real story. Not about one man standing up to an HOA, though that was part of it. It was about a community learning to work together, to respect individual property rights while maintaining common standards, to value substance over appearance, and to help each other when times got tough. Those 12 families who had depended on my backup generator that night had become the core of a stronger, more resilient neighborhood. The crisis had revealed both the problem and the solution, and while Brenda cutting my power had been meant as punishment, it had instead become the catalyst for positive change. I still had the extension cords in my garage, neatly coiled and ready if ever needed again. But I hoped they'd just gather dust. Not because I didn't want to help my neighbors, I'd do it again in a heartbeat, but because I hoped we'd never face a situation that unnecessary and avoidable again. The HOA board continued to function well under Sarah's leadership. They focused on actual community needs, maintaining common areas, organizing social events, addressing real safety concerns rather than trying to enforce aesthetic conformity. Dues went down slightly as legal expenses disappeared. The neighborhood thrived. And me? I went back to enjoying my retirement, working on projects that interested me, helping out neighbors when asked, and generally living the quiet life I'd always wanted. The solar panels kept saving me money. The generator sat ready but mostly unused. Life was good. One afternoon in late August, I was installing a new weather station on my roof when Tom called up to me. "Hey Yates, got a question for you." I climbed down. "What's up?" "My daughter's doing a school project about renewable energy. Would you be willing to talk to her about your solar setup?" "Sure, bring her over anytime. How about Saturday morning?" That Saturday, I spent 2 hours with Tom's daughter Emma, explaining how solar panels work, showing her my monitoring system, discussing the environmental benefits and the economics. She was bright and asked excellent questions. At the end, she asked if she could take my picture for her presentation. "Of course. Where do you want me?" "By the solar panels," she said. "They're the coolest part." Standing there while a 12-year-old photographed me and my solar panels, I had to smile. A year ago, these panels had made me a target. Now they were an educational resource, a point of pride, and an example for others. That evening, I got an email from the new HOA board. They wanted to nominate me for the neighborhood's first ever Community Service Award, to be presented at the fall barbecue. I almost declined, uncomfortable with the attention. But Sarah called before I could reply. "Don't you dare say no," she said. "What you did during the power outage and how you handled the whole solar panel conflict changed this neighborhood for the better. Let people say thank you. It wasn't that big a deal." Yes, it was. You could have been angry and vindictive. You could have sued the HOA into oblivion. Instead, you helped your neighbors and worked toward a constructive solution. That matters. So I accepted, and at the fall barbecue, in front of what seemed like the entire neighborhood, Sarah presented me with a plaque that read, "Yates Irving Community Service Award," for exemplifying the spirit of neighborly cooperation and resilience. It was hokey and sentimental, and I was embarrassed and touched in equal measure. But what made it worth it was looking around at all the faces, people who'd become genuine friends through this whole crazy experience. People who'd learned that a community was more than just houses near each other, more than rules and regulations. It was people choosing to care about each other and work together. Tom gave a short speech about the night his mother-in-law had needed medical help and how my generator had quite possibly saved her life. Michelle talked about the peace of mind of knowing her neighbors had her back. Roberto discussed how the neighborhood had come together not just during the power outage but in its aftermath, building something better than what had existed before. And then Brenda showed up. I hadn't known she was coming, and from the looks on people's faces, neither had they. She walked up hesitantly, carrying a covered dish. "I know I wasn't invited," she said to Sarah, "but I heard about this and I wanted to come. I brought potato salad, the good kind, with the bacon." There was an awkward silence. Then Sarah smiled. "Everyone's welcome. Thanks for coming, Brenda." Later, as people were eating and socializing, Brenda found me. "That's a nice award. Well deserved." "Thanks. How are you doing?" "Better. Therapy's helping. And I started volunteering with Habitat for Humanity. Turns out I like building things more than enforcing rules about them." "That's great." I wanted to say, watching all this today, seeing what the neighborhood has become, it made me realize something. I was so focused on my vision of what the neighborhood should look like that I never stopped to think about what it should feel like. You figured that out. You built something real here. The neighborhood built it. I just didn't get in the way. She laughed. Ever the humble one. "Anyway, I won't keep you. Enjoy your party." As the sun set and people began packing up, I helped clean up, gathering trash and folding chairs. This was what community looked like, I thought. Not perfectly manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes, not rules and fines and enforcement actions. Just people being decent to each other, helping out, caring. The solar panels on my roof would keep generating power for decades to come. The generator in my garage would be ready whenever needed. But the real infrastructure, the thing that would keep this neighborhood strong, was the connections we'd built between people. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how close it had all come to going differently. If I'd been more confrontational, if the neighbors hadn't rallied together, if Brenda had been more stubborn, this could have turned into a years-long legal battle that poisoned the whole community. Instead, a crisis had become an opportunity. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Thanks for everything you've done for this neighborhood. We're lucky to have you," I typed back. "I'm the lucky one. Good night." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Lights glowed in windows. Solar panels on multiple roofs absorbed the last faint light of dusk, ready to convert tomorrow's sunshine into clean energy. Generators sat ready in garages, an insurance policy against future storms. And somewhere in all those houses, 12 families who'd once depended on my backup generator were living their lives, probably not thinking much about that chaotic night when everything had gone wrong and then somehow come together. Right, that was fine. That was how it should be. The best communities are the ones where the infrastructure, both physical and social, works so seamlessly that people barely notice it. They just live their lives, secure in the knowledge that if something goes wrong, their neighbors will be there to help. I'd lived in this house for 16 years now. I planned to stay for many more, and thanks to those solar panels that had caused so much trouble, I'd be doing it while saving money and reducing my environmental impact, which had been the point all along. The HOA was now just what it should have been from the start, a neutral administrator of common resources and a facilitator of community connections. Nothing more, nothing less. And if another storm came, if the power went out again, I knew exactly what would happen. Extension cords would emerge from multiple garages. Generators would hum to life. Neighbors would check on each other. Because that's what we did now, that's who we'd become. All because 12 HOA families had depended on my backup generator that night, and because they shouldn't have cut my power in the first place. The crisis had revealed the cracks in the system, and together we'd built something better in its place. I turned off my light and smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow was supposed to be sunny, perfect weather for solar panels.